On Thursday, Donald Trump gave a speech, a Q&A, whatever the hell you want to call it, to the New York Economic Club. And it didn't go well. And that is, of course, putting it very mildly. As most people, I'm sure, are aware of at this point, Donald Trump tried to talk about policy, specifically what he would do to lower childcare costs for parents here in the United States. A very simple question that, believe it or not, actually has very simple answers, but he couldn't answer it. And instead, he rambled like a lunatic for 2 straight minutes about anything other than what he would do to lower childcare costs here in the United States. So, in case you haven't seen it, here is Donald Trump's entire response to what he would do to lower childcare costs. And you tell me if you actually hear anything in there that involves lowering childcare costs. Here he is.
If you win in November, can you commit to prioritizing legislation to make childcare affordable? And if so, what specific piece of legislation will you advance?
Well, I would do that, and we're sitting down. I was we had Senator Marco Rubio, and my daughter Ivanka was so impactful on that issue. It's a very important issue. But I think when you talk about the kind of numbers that I'm talking about, that, because look, childcare is childcare. There's something, you have to have it. In this country, you have to have it. But when you talk about those numbers compared to the kind of numbers that I'm talking about by taxing foreign nations at levels that they're not used to, but they'll get used to it very quickly. And it's not going to stop them from doing business with us, but they'll have a very substantial tax when they send product into our country. Those numbers are so much bigger than any numbers that we're talking about, including childcare, that it's going to take care. We're going to have, I look forward to having no deficits within a fairly short period of time, coupled with the reductions that I told you about on waste and fraud and all of the other things that are going on in our country. Because I have to stay with childcare. I want to stay with childcare, but those numbers are small relative to the kind of economic numbers that I'm talking about, including growth, but growth also headed up by what the plan is that I just told you about. We're going to be taking in trillions of dollars, and as much as child care is talked about as being expensive, it's relatively speaking not very expensive compared to the kind of numbers we'll be taking in. We're going to make this into an incredible country that can afford to take care of its people, and then we'll worry about the rest of the world. Let's help other people. But we're going to take care of our country first. This is about America first. It's about make America great again. We have to do it because right now we're a failing nation. So we'll take care of it. Thank you.
So that's a lot of talk about tariffs. And of course, it's downplaying the significance that childcare costs play on working families here in the United States. Like, that's a small issue. No, it's not. If you're a working family here in the United States struggling to get by and you've got kids in childcare, it is the biggest issue. Guess what? American families, those working paycheck to paycheck, we actually care more about the cost of childcare than we do about sending money to Ukraine. We care more about that than we care, about the federal deficit. They're not sitting around their kitchen table every night thinking like, oh, well, we can't pay to send little Jimmy to daycare so that we can both work. But I tell you, the bigger issue, of course, is that deficit. That's what's really keeping me up at night. Sorry, we can't afford dinner, but, the deficit. No, American families, and for the love of friggin' God, it drives me insane that political commentators don't understand this, because I guess you're all so rich that you've never had to deal with these issues, right? I have. For years. Not knowing if we're going to have money from one month to the next. Putting off buying our prescriptions because we simply couldn't afford them. I was walking around with expired EpiPens for my children who have severe nut allergies for 2 years because I couldn't afford $1,200 twice a year to get their medication. Do you know what never factored into my decision on whether or not to buy their medication? The federal deficit. The military aid to foreign countries. Like, that stuff doesn't actually matter to real voters. You people out there with these niche issues like, well, it's the deficit, it's the trade imbalance, it's the foreign affairs. Most Americans don't actually care about those things, and I'm sorry if that's a harsh wake-up call for y'all, but maybe you've never been poor. Because I spent most of my life poor. And those were the issues we worried about, not those other things. Sorry for that aside, but that's something that's been brewing in me apparently for years, and I just had to get it out. So thank you for coming to my little therapy session here. But let's continue with Donald Trump's incoherence. And of course, technically what I just said was all related to that because he downplayed the significance of childcare costs for working families. Let's go to another point here. For weeks now, Donald Trump's aides, his staffers, his advisors, and his allies have all been telling him, get away from the personal attacks, talk about policy instead. And what have I told you every time? Trump talking about policy is going to be worse for his campaign than him engaging in personal attacks. That little clip I just showed you, him ranting incoherently for 2 minutes when asked about policy, proves my point. That is literally what I have been telling y'all for weeks. Trump is so much worse on policy than he is with his personal attacks. So it still blows my mind that you have these Republican allies out there telling him, you just stick to policy and we'll win on that. He's not going to win on whatever the hell it is he just said there. Not to mention, although it is worth mentioning, of course, that every economist that has looked at Donald Trump's economic plans, including those from his alma mater, Wharton Business School, have said that his economic policies would be a disaster, they would add to the deficit, and they would shrink our GDP. Whereas the proposals of Harris would in fact grow the deficit, but they would also grow the GDP. That report came out just 3 days ago. So that one's not the one from Wharton. They also trashed, of course, Trump's policy. But that's just a report that came out 3 days ago, telling us that Harris's policy would grow GDP, Trump's would shrink it. On the issue of economics, Harris has the clear edge. And I do think, obviously, more and more voters are waking up to that fact. So Trump loses when he talks about the policy. He loses when he talks about the personal attacks against these people. He loses on everything because he is, in fact, a loser. And he's never had to deal with the problems that American families actually have to deal with. That's why he downplays it. That's why he hasn't put any thought into it, because he's never had these lived, shared experiences with American voters. Now, I don't know if Kamala Harris has, but at least she seems to understand them. And that's the difference there. J.D. Vance is somebody who did have these experiences, yet still to this day pretends he didn't, and has forgotten all about his history. I haven't. I haven't forgotten mine. I haven't forgotten where I came from. I haven't forgotten the early years of my career, hell, most of my career, when I couldn't make ends meet. I know what it's like. So that's why it pisses me off to hear Donald Trump downplaying the significance of being able to afford childcare expenses. Because in order to afford childcare for my family, I had to take on not 1, but 2 extra jobs. 2! Trump's never had to do that. Most Americans probably have. So to listen to him not only not give an answer, but to downplay it is beyond insulting to millions of us that have gone through that. Hi everyone, this here is little Athena. And Athena would like to know why you haven't subscribed to Fair and Balanced yet. So please, don't let Athena down. Subscribe today.